I really did manage to get my players to play the Bachelorette, where I had 4 of them trying to convince the 5th to accept the hand in marriage. And all of this was spurred into the idea I had read almost 20 years beforehand in a book called Wraith the Oblivion. So here's a question. Have you read Wraith the Oblivion? No, of course you haven't, because nobody has read Wraith the Oblivion, which is a shame, because it's one of the best books I've ever read in terms of roleplay games. The setting's so evocative, it's so emotional, and yet it is really, really fundamentally difficult to run, not because the content is gross or offensive, but because of what it asks of the players. So Wraith the Oblivion is part of White Wolf's World of Darkness universe, the same setting as we find Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf the Apocalypse, which are probably the most famous books in the series. But in Wraith the Oblivion, you get to play essentially a recently dead individual. You're somebody that never escaped the ties of this world. You weren't an awful person, so you're not dragged down into oblivion, hell, or whatever it may be. You weren't one of these people that managed to work through their issues so they can transcend into what we think may or may not be heaven. That's an interesting point in the game. Now, I'm not going to dive too deeply into the lore. There are plenty of other channels out there that have done it really well. I might look at it in the future because it's a very interesting game. But what I'm interested in is the creation of the wraiths themselves. You're a recently deceased ghost, and it's an incredibly bleak afterlife that you have in limbo. And the ultimate win state of the wraith is to essentially overcome these things tying you onto the world, or the self-destructive part of you, so you can transcend. So when you're making your character, you create these passions that drive you. So it could be something like to protect my children, or it could be to see your friend succeed, or a business partner succeed in whatever you are working at. And this is what drives you through as you try to interact with the real world as best as you can. But at the same time as you're making your character, you have to build your shadow. Now, your shadow is your self-destructive part of yourself. If your shadow ever consumes you, you become what's called a spectre, essentially a twisted ghost, a violent, insane individual that revels solely in destruction and self-hatred. That's effectively the loose state of your game. You give them an archetype, perhaps like an abuser, somebody who is always out there trying to hurt you and harm you. And these shadows gain their own abilities and their own power points, angst, that they can use against you during a game. But here's the rub. Your shadow is not played by you, your shadow is played by somebody else on the table. So everybody plays a wraith and everybody plays a shadow. And they can whisper hateful things into your ears or try to drag you down throughout the game. It makes for a really interesting and difficult dynamic to pull off. So essentially, what you're role-playing in Wraith the Oblivion is ghosts with incredible trauma that other players are trying to drag down and make worse while you're trying to overcome it. That's probably why it's so difficult to play. But there is one more rule in Wraith the Oblivion that when I read it, it just stuck like glue in my head for years and years and years, because it's so unique and so interesting. And that is something called the harrowing. Now, the idea of the harrowing is this, is that during your time, your wraith may sustain damage, or maybe something truly, truly awful happens to your wraith, something that traumatizes. Maybe one of their fetters, the thing that binds them to this world, is destroyed through some incident. And when that happens, they fall in on themselves. Their psyche consumes them, and your wraith essentially becomes hostage to the shadow, and they go through a harrowing. This is how the harrowing mechanically works. The storyteller, that's the GM, kicks that player out of the room, and he gathers around the table the other players, and he comes up with like a short vignette, essentially a morality tale that they're going to put this wraith through. And all of the other players are NPCs in this morality tale. And it's chiefly run by the shadow. And it's there with the sole purpose to essentially torment them. And all the other players are there to support the shadow in their aim. And essentially they've got to try and overcome some lesson in their life or face down an issue. So some examples could be, let's say your passion is to protect your kids. And your shadow's dark passion, the thing that's driving them is to like get them into care or to destroy their futures. So perhaps maybe they could see as part of this harrowing, they see the mother taken away and the children taken in by the system, whereas the Wraith has very little power to stop that or do anything about it. So it's a brilliant idea. And you can see why it's hard to roleplay, because you're essentially trying to traumatize one of your party members by using the other players to traumatize that party member. But it's a brilliant concept. So many years later, I've tried to run this in my own games. I believe the structure that the Harrowing presents is actually really useful. And I have adjusted it into my own games, and for the lack of a better word, and can't call it Harrowing, I call them player-driven vignettes. So these are either short scenarios, or perhaps even an entire session, where we're going to focus in on one character, and the other players are going to play supporting or roles in that session. So when would we use a player-driven vignette? So I see a few scenarios. Number one, when your player is logistically separated from the rest of the party and there's no easy fudge to get them back. So we can come up with a temporary scenario that represents the time while the other part of the party finds a way to get to them. It could be that we need to get an important plot point across, and it might be a fun and entertaining way to do so, which isn't just a pure exposition dump. Show, don't tell is what we want to do in storytelling, and that's even true in roleplay games. And also, there may be a task that our player wants to do that's going to take up a large amount of time, but we don't want the rest of the party sitting there doing nothing, because that's not fun for anybody. And this is the way I suggest you set it up. So number one, it is going to need some prep. If you do it really ad hoc, I think it's probably going to go off the rails a bit and not be as satisfying or as interesting. Every player needs to be given a short brief, and that perhaps only needs to be about 3 points. Like, what's this person's goal? What is their character like? And maybe 1 or 2 more little extra bits, just to give them a bit more flavour. And that player, they're a capable person, they'll fill in the rest of the gaps themselves. And then we also need a very clear goal for the session, which should also give us an end point as well. So, a very clear point on which we believe the session has ended. So it might be that somebody completes a specific goal, or it might be that someone has received the plot information that we need them to do. Okay, so what about a few examples of this? So a few examples could be maybe let's say one of the characters has to infiltrate like a thieves guild. Part of a way for them to prove their loyalty, they need to go on a heist or something. Well, then we could have the other players perhaps playing other thieves going on the heist with them. Or maybe something's happened in a dream. That character goes into a dream or has a vision, and we can get our other players playing the weirdest stuff possible as dream guides or whatever. Or it might be something like traveling to a different dimension or traveling back in time, and we can get the other players to play temporary characters. I'll go through a few examples that we've done myself. So the first one, the Bachelorette, which to this day has been one of the most memorable sessions I've run. So the idea is that one of the players couldn't make it to the session, and through various shenanigans, the party got separated into different dimensions. Most people managed to make it back, but we had this one last player, and I was thinking, well, how are we going to get to do this? And we needed to come up with some role play for him to do while he was there. So I came up with this idea. He awakes in a kingdom, and everybody assumes immediately that the character he was playing, so it was a she he was playing, was this great queen, the Emerald Queen that the entire society waiting to awake from a slumber for 1,000 years. When she awoke, immediately the most powerful beings in the world descended upon her kingdom seeking her hand in marriage. So for pretty much the entirety of the session, I had the party playing temporary characters. And they would take the queen out on dates, write a love poetry, and offer her various dowries. And she had to choose which one to marry. And it was so good. It was so good. I even repeated it a second time with a different party. And my goodness, it was surprisingly touching, some of the moments in that. So, for example, the characters I had was Grognak the Destroyer, who was essentially Genghis Khan, who was offering as part of his dowry was like the wealth of 1,000 kingdoms that he had defeated. It was Necromancer Prime, who was essentially like Skeletor with a giant army of the undead who would say, well, if you marry me, I'll make you a lich, you can live forever. And then Fiona the Fighter, who's essentially the giant Amazons from Futurama. And finally, Josh the Farmer, just some dude who managed to make it in who think it'd be really nice to marry the queen. The other time I've done this is when a character who was Wizard of Space and Time, managed to essentially meet like the council of other versions of himself from multiple dimensions. And it was a great way for me to bring loads of plot points across, because they're trying to save the world, to see how other worlds had attempted to solve the exact same problem. And because the wizard was kind of morally grey, the other people were playing just super evil versions of him, like one that decided to eat the rest of the party and then eat the world, whereas another one essentially became Satan and was marching his armies across the world. Above all else, it is good fun. It creates memorable sessions for you and your party, player-driven vignettes. I guarantee by doing that, it's going to create a highly memorable session for your players that they will talk about years and years to come, just because it's such a break from the norm and you get to really push the boundaries of what roleplay is. All right. So, thank you very much and ta-ra.